Welcome to part 4 of the under 1000 ELO King's Gambit course. We are still considering responses to the line e4, e5, then f4 starting the King's Gambit, and e takes f4 accepting the Gambit. Here we always play knight to f3 to block the enemy queen from going to h4. And so far we have considered the moves in order of popularity, starting with knight to c6, then knight to f6, and finally d6. The next most popular move, and the topic of this video, is the response d5. The last few lines we discussed, we were going for a strong central pawn structure, playing e4 and d4, and punishing black for getting rid of one of his center pawns for the free f-pawn. In this line, however, black decides to fight back in the center, challenging our goal for central control. We, as King Gambit players, know that we have to play moves that require black to respond in some way, to play moves that keep black on his toes. These types of moves are generally checks, captures, and attacks. We don't have any checks and attacks, but we have an obvious capture we can play that forces black to respond in a certain way that we can prepare for. The move I'm hopefully leading you to is pawn takes pawn in the center. We concede one of our center pawns for one of black's center pawns, which is nothing to worry about. Black now has run out of center pawns, and we have one still that we are going to try to push into the center at some point in the near future with d4. Claiming the center and opening our dark squared bishop to pressure the Gambit pawn. 4 out of 5 games black will immediately recapture the pawn with the queen, which is great for us because this is already a weak move that has a 60% win rate. We will come back to this position in a little bit to consider some other more challenging lines, but we'll start here. The reason this is a weak move is because the queen is in the center of the board. Anytime the queen comes out early in the opening, you should look at ways to attack it. Attacking the queen is a very forcing move because, well, it is the strongest piece in the game, so it must be protected. We can attack the queen with knight to c3. By attacking the queen, we force the queen to move. And generally speaking, it is bad to have to move the same piece multiple times in the opening because you waste a move that could have been used getting more pieces into the fight. The queen has a lot of options here, which we will discuss. However, about half the time, black will give our king a check on e6. We can simply block the check with the bishop, which serves the purpose of getting another of our pieces out and setting up the king to castle and get to safety. We should avoid blocking with the queen, because now our bishop is trapped in, and it will be a while until our king can get to a safe spot. It's much easier to just block with the bishop, and the game will continue with normal development, like knight to f6. And now play is very simple. We just castle, and then play d4, almost no matter what, especially in the case of the most common move in the position, bishop to c5, because d4 attacks the bishop, and is supported by the knight and queen. We are looking at a 66% win rate here as white, which is actually awesome. Let's consider a couple other queen retreat moves. We considered queen e6 just now. Next, let's consider queen to d8, retreating back to the starting square. This Scandinavian opening style move is technically fine for black. The computer gives the position plus 0.4, but it looks like he hasn't moved. So I'd be quite happy playing white here. Now we can go through with prioritizing d4 and opening up our bishop, and that's great. I do want to suggest a move with a slightly higher win rate at this level. That move is bishop to c4, and the reason that this move wins more than d4 is because it sets up a simple but sneaky trap. A trap that 21% of people play into in this position and is actually the most common response. That move is bishop to g4. If black plays anything other than bishop to g4, then we can play d4, open up our dark squared bishop, castle, and play like we have in similar lines. However, if bishop to g4 is played, we play a game-winning tactical move sequence. For under 1,000 level players, pinning the knight to the queen like this is extremely tempting. Yes, we can't move our knight without losing our queen, but that doesn't necessarily make this a good move. And here is one reason why playing this move automatically is unwise. Notice the bishop on g4 is completely undefended, and our queen is eyeing it. If only our knight wasn't there, we could capture the bishop. The only way we could get the knight out of the way, without allowing the bishop to take our queen, would be to attack a piece more valuable than the queen, which is only the king. In the current position, we can't attack the king with our knight, but we can get the king to go to a square where we can attack it. The king has to capture the bishop, otherwise, black just loses a pawn and brings his king into a vulnerable spot for nothing in return. So he captures, and now we give the king a check. Not here, because that square is controlled by the queen. But we give the check here. The king will probably retreat to maintain some semblance of safety, and we can finally capture our prize. Black still has no pieces out, and has lost castling rights, and has a weak pawn on f4. We are developed and ready to castle, and release the rest of our pieces. Now let's consider one more queen retreating move. The third most common response here is queen to d6. This move keeps the queen a little more active, but still out of reach of all of our pieces. Additionally, it defends the f-pawn. Just like the last line, we're going to play bishop to c4 here, setting our trap. If black plays bishop to g4 here, and we go through with our plan, we have to be more careful here, because we can't use the e5 square to give a check. Because it is controlled by the queen, we have to give a check the other way. Now if the king retreats to e8, we simply capture the bishop, and play is fairly normal. However, black has one tricky resource in this position we should be aware of. He can counterintuitively bring the king out to actually attack the knight. Here we still just take the bishop, but we have to be careful in protecting our knight and queen, as black can try and remove the queen from defending the knight. So we have to slide our queen over to the h4 square where it can still defend the knight. This places us in a somewhat tricky situation if black checks our king because our pieces are somewhat misplaced. Kudos to your opponent if they have made it this far. But there's one more trick in the bag here. Black has a fork, attacking the king and the knight at the same time. We have to block the check. Black can capture our knight, and ending this line, we can capture the pawn to get some compensation. The computer gives this a dead equal evaluation. However, in reality, your opponent is not going to find all of these moves. It's good to be aware that black has this tricky way to trap the knight that gives him an equal position. And it's good to understand the line so that you know when your opponent deviates from the best move to look for why it isn't the best move. Anytime you learn an opening like this, it is important to understand that people, especially at the under 1000 level, are very unpredictable. Many lines you won't see exactly in a game. However, it's the ideas and plans of positions you need to understand for certain positions. Understanding why we play certain moves will help you make good decisions in positions you have never seen before, but are similar to ones we've talked about. We study the main lines and the best lines of play, because then you understand that if your opponent plays a move that is not one we learned in this course or while studying on your own, you know that that move is probably weak for some reason. Then you know to spend extra time figuring out why it is weak. Let me give you an example to explain this better. In this video, we have talked about the moves queen to e6, queen to d8, and queen to d6. These are both the best moves in the position and the most common moves. But let's say you reach this position in a game and your opponent decides to play queen to c6, which is played 6% of the time in this position. For a moment you might think, oh crap, I don't know this line, I don't know what to play. But then you ask yourself, well, why don't I know this line, even with all the time I spent studying the opening? Well, the answer, if you have actually studied the opening, is probably because it's not a good move. There are way too many bad moves in every opening to study them all, so we skip those, and if we sense any deviation from our study that feels wrong, we look for why it is wrong and try to figure it out. Hopefully, if you spend a moment here, you can recognize that the queen, king, are on the same diagonal. We can take advantage of this with our bishop, attacking the queen and pinning it to the king. The queen can capture the bishop, and we take back with the knight, and go up huge in material with a 93% win rate and a demoralizing position that will probably cause your opponent to resign. Anyway, all of that to say that if you encounter a line that you didn't see in this course, Take a moment to see if there is a reason why the move wasn't considered dangerous enough to need to be studied. From the lines we've seen so far, you may have noticed that maybe taking with the queen here is not the best move, because it can be chased away. And you would be correct. Even though it is the overwhelmingly most played move in the position, it is a pretty weak response. Black can play almost anything else in this position, and it will be better for him. In many cases, we will just continue with our plan, playing d4, to open our bishop to attacking the pawn. One of the exceptions is our response to the move knight f6, the second most common move here. The reason being that knight f6 comes with a threat. He can now take our pawn with the knight, which is significantly better than taking with the queen, because we can't just chase the knight away with knight c3. So we want to do something to defend our pawn and prevent that capture. We play c4, letting our c-pawn support our d-pawn, and stopping the knight from capturing. Black can approach this position several ways. He can just develop as normal and play something like bishop c5, in which case we continue with our plan of playing d4 and getting our pieces out quickly. Play is fairly simple here, and we tout a 59% win rate. But Black may play a slightly more challenging move, c6. Now, as is the common theme in this opening, we prioritize quick development. We evaluate Black's threat of pawn takes pawn, and realize that we either have to take the c-pawn, which allows Black to get his knight out, and get ahead in development, or we have to give up the d-pawn, because Black has too much pressure here. With the hint that we should prioritize development, you might find the move d4, carrying out our normal plan, and sacrificing our d-pawn. Most games Black will immediately capture our d-pawn, giving us the chance to take the pawn. We wouldn't want to take the d-pawn back because 1, it is defended by our bishop, and 2, it doesn't get one of our pieces out like this move does. And also, Black can just take with the knight, and we are on our heels, a bit behind in development. So once again, as a King's Gambit player, whenever given the choice between taking a pawn or anything else, or getting one of our pieces out to an active square, we should usually choose getting a piece out. One more common move here we will go over is the recurring mistake Black seems to play of bishop to g4, creating a sort of pseudo-threat of the knight and queen pin. There is really hardly anything scary from this threat in King Gambit lines. If anything, it makes our position safer, because Black can no longer play the dangerous g5, g4. That doesn't necessarily mean this move is terrible, but begins to give us an edge if we play solid. Since Black has not created any pressing threats, we can continue with our plan. So we play d4, and once again, Black is most likely going to take our pawn with the queen. Now we have the option of chasing the queen as before, or grabbing the pawn and getting our bishop out and taking the pawn. Or we can defend our knight a second time with bishop to e2. All those are very reasonable moves, but for simplicity and based on the success rate in the database, I recommend the move bishop to e2. Black has 2 attackers on the knight, and we have 2 defenders, which is good, but we could end up with an isolated f-pawn. And for whatever reason, humans struggle to play that position. So we add a defender to the knight, prevent this. Now Black can't take our knight without allowing us a deadly attack along the long diagonal. If instead we had taken the pawn, the line could have gone something like this. And now we have isolated pawns. Black defends his c-pawn, and we isolate one of his pawns. And we have a slightly advantageous endgame, but one that is extremely complex, and for us inexperienced humans, the odds for each side winning are close to even. Thus, the decision to play more solid and keep our pieces on the board longer. Black will probably try to put more pressure on d-pawn. And so now we finally resort to chasing the queen and continue to play normal chess, hoping to capture the f-pawn at some point. That is as far as we are going to go on the d5 line. Overall, playing d5 on move 3 leads to some fairly simple lines. We need to remember to create threats while getting pieces out, and to evaluate Black's threats to see if we really need to respond or if we can continue developing. Here it is important to remember to always take the d-pawn and to be prepared to chase the queen away if it comes out, or to defend it if Black adds attackers. Thanks for taking the time to watch through the end. and best of luck playing the King's Gambit. See you in the next one.